Professor Kylie O'Brien. Welcome to Considering Cannabis, the ICCM podcast. The ICCM is the International College of Cannabinoid Medicine. It's a fabulous new online learning platform for healthcare practitioners focused firmly on medicinal cannabis. Now, today I'm delighted to have Charles Kovess with me as my guest. Now, Charles is Australia's passion provocateur. He has his own webcast where he talks about all manner of things. So I suggest tune into that if you can. He was a previous lawyer. He's now the Secretary of the Australian Industrial Hemp Alliance, and he's also CEO of Textile Composite Industries. So, Charles, welcome to Considering Cannabis.
Thank you, Kylie. Wonderful to be invited. And what I love about Considering Cannabis with Kylie is it's a CK initial, which of course is mine as well.
Very good. Now, Charles, you've had quite a varied background in your career, and you're a lawyer, and you left the legal profession in some ways 20 years ago. Why did you get involved in the hemp industry?
Well, I loved being a lawyer. All my life I wanted to be a lawyer. I stopped being a lawyer, changed career to teach people to discover and pursue their passion. Mm. And when you think about that, my work has been about empowering people to make their own decisions for themselves. Then 12 years ago this month, quite ironically, in October 2012, mm-hmm. I was approached by one of my long-standing clients from the 70s who introduced me to Adrian Clark. And Adrian Clark invented a decorticator. I'll tell you about that later, a machine for processing hemp. And hemp is cannabis. We'll talk about that later. But Adrian came and they wanted help in commercializing. They wanted my help as a consultant. I do a lot of marketing over the journey. And I said, I knew bugger all and probably didn't even know that much about hemp. And Adrian Clark was not an engineer, but he worked with colleagues to invent a machine to solve the biggest problem in the hemp industry. And here's the point with freedom. Adrian considered, and I agree with him, that one of the most crucial protections for human freedom is profitable, sustainable, independent family farms. And you picture that model, that's the choice. So he got into hemp because he said, to preserve freedom, we need farmers all over the countryside who can tell the government to get stuffed.
Fair enough.
in simple terms, because if you imagine that all farming is corporatized and everybody lives in the city, and we rely on transport systems and whatever, then we are absolutely beholden to government.
That's exactly right.
And so and we're seeing it right now in this COVID situation. And so, freedom has been a big issue for me, Kylie, over the journey. And my Hungarian refugee parents who arrived in Australia in 1949, they came to Australia for freedom, to get away from communism, because Russia had taken over Hungary. In the 56 uprising, which happened 7 years after they left, that was also about Hungarians pushing back. And so freedom is a big issue. And hemp, Adrian said, if we can make hemp work in Australia, it'll be fantastic for everybody and preserve freedom. So that's how I got into it. And I've been in it now for 9 years. And then Adrian died on the 15th of October, 2015. So 6 years ago he died. So I became the CEO as well as the International Marketing Director.
Wow. Okay. So just for our viewers who may not understand what's hemp? Is it different to cannabis? What is it?
Well, it's an excellent question. Hemp is cannabis. And Kylie, just like you and I are both human beings, we're different. So hemp, more particularly industrial hemp, is hemp that has one fundamental difference between other forms of cannabis, and particularly cannabis that has a particular cannabinoid called THC, which gets you high. Quite interesting. You'll be able to explain, I'm sure you have to your listeners in previous programs, why does THC get us high? It's just like saying, why does alcohol get us high? But hemp is cannabis with a low level of THC, of less than 1%, probably 0.3%, but the 1% rate. And that's the only difference. The other interesting thing is there are over 150 seed varieties of cannabis. Some of them have high THC, some of them low THC. But it's a bit like human beings. There's 8 billion human beings on the planet, and I wonder how many types of human beings there are, but we're all one species. Same with cannabis.
Okay, so different countries will have different limits, upper limits to that THC content. So in the US, for example, it's 0.3. Under our legislation,
we go to 1%, which is good.
1% in Australia. Okay.
By the way, Kylie, if you want good marijuana, no one will pay money for marijuana if it's less than 15% THC.
Right.
So it's this 0.3% is one. There's no way you could get high with THC if it was anywhere under 5%. So this nonsensical 0.3%, which, by the way, I hear when I look at the research, the French came up with that 0.3% because they considered they were the only ones who could produce seeds that would keep the level at 0.3%. So they were making an exclusive market for themselves to sell hemp seed.
Oh, that's interesting. Charles, tell us a little bit about what hemp can be used for. And let's start with clothing, because I remember listening to you at a conference in Borneo a few years ago talking about your T-shirt. So what's so good about the use of hemp fibre for clothing?
I can wear this hemp T-shirt for 4 weeks in a row, Kylie. No wash, no smell.
Good grief.
Because hemp fibre is a natural antimicrobial, antibacterial.
Right.
And the antibacterial is important, as you would well know. That's your area of expertise. But perspiration, your perspiration doesn't smell. It's the bacteria that grows on the perspiration that causes the smell. And so if there's no bacteria, so I perspire in this T-shirt all the time. I'll run around all through summer. And, when it gets dirty, I wash it. But zero smell after 4 weeks. And it's just wonderful. Whereas if I wear a cotton, let alone a synthetic shirt, after a day, a day and a half, it gets very pongy. And many people in audiences have noticed the same thing. So it is a wonderful material that you can grow. Most hemp can be grown without any chemicals, where cotton and synthetics are all produced with a lot of chemicals. So these chemicals in close contact with your body are not healthy. So textiles is one of the core uses of hemp, but it's only 1 out of 10. Get that? 10 categories of products. It's ridiculous. So we can do clothing, food, which comes from the seed. We can build houses. We can do medicinal cannabis from the flowers and the buds. We can produce ethanol fuel from the herd. And the herd is the core of the plant, and the fiber is the outside of the plant. And the fiber is what we make this T-shirt from. We have fertilizer. So when you grow hemp, you are fertilizing the soil, not extracting from the soil. Then you have composite materials, and I'll show you something in a moment where all plastic can be replaced with composite materials. Hemp can also replace fiberglass. Category number 8 is body care products, and you clearly have it, Kylie, because you're so beautiful, so you put it on your skin, I know. The 9th category is rope and baling twine, which is again an ancient use of hemp. And number 10 is packaging materials. So the whole cardboard industry using timber for fiber can be replaced with hemp for fiber. 10 categories of products, Kylie. It's very exciting.
Now that's really interesting. So this must frighten a lot of the industries that this is going to compete with or disrupt. Am I right there?
Yes, it does. In the one sense, it does disrupt existing supply chains of environmentally environmentally dirtying technology. So let's take plastic, for example. All the plastic going into our environment, all the microplastics going to the ocean. Apparently, we as human beings are full of microplastics now because of the food that we
That's
eat.
right.
And so people who make plastic packaging, they're at risk because there are two big tidal wave movements happening on the planet that hemp didn't create. The two tidal waves are, number one, ESG movement,
Right.
ESG, environmental social governance,
Right.
and the second is the circular economy of minimizing waste.
Right.
So these two tidal waves are going along, and my mantra that I've crafted is that hemp can surf the tidal waves of ESG and the circular economy to global growth and success. So these companies that use plastic as packaging, they're looking for viable alternatives. Now, the plastics industry has a choice. It can say, we're going to move into hemp, but hemp packaging materials are totally biodegradable, compostable, and don't cause any problems like plastic does. And so, yes, it will disrupt certain supply chains, but everyone in those supply chains can use hemp as a raw material instead of oil or hydrocarbons.
Right. Now, tell me, you also, I remember you saying at this conference that you could look under the bonnet of a Mercedes-Benz and find car parts made out of hemp. Is that correct?
No, body parts.
Body parts, okay.
Yes, so a number of manufacturers of cars in Europe use 70 kilograms of hemp fiber as non-structural materials for making motor cars. Mercedes, particularly, BMW,
yes,
Audi, and the fourth one I think is Suzuki in Europe. They have a big manufacturing there, and so there's a big movement to using more and more hemp in production. Why? Because that also reduces the greenhouse gas emissions compared to using fiberglass.
Right. Okay.
Compared to using metal.
Yeah.
And so let me give you an example of what that looks like.
This will be interesting.
So this applies to the car industry as well, but there's a farm in Tasmania that produces these bowls.
Right. Yep.
Caesar salad, packaged Caesar salad at Woolworths.
Yes.
Plastic. They make 120 million of these a year.
Right.
So for Australia's population, that means 5 of these are consumed by every person on the in Australia each year. That's a lot of plastic going in a landfill.
Yeah.
Now this can be replaced by a hemp bowl that is biodegradable, compostable.
Wow.
You can crush this up and put in the garden and it will break down. It is biodegradable resin, epoxy resin.
How long does it take to break down?
Well, that'll depend on how it's made. So these are just they're the same dimensions as the plastic, and they cost 20 cents more. Now, the same thing with the car industry. Hemp is the world's strongest natural fiber, and so this gives you an example. You can make car bodies out of this material.
Right.
Okay, so it's quite remarkable. The power to the strength to weight ratio of hemp composite materials is just magnificent. And so that's what's happening. And our machine makes it even more viable because the hemp has not been damaged. Our machine produces a stronger fiber that car manufacturers, by using hemp, they don't consume anywhere near as much energy in making their vehicles.
What's this machine? Is this the decorticator you were talking about earlier?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me what is a decorticator? I need to know now.
Well, a decorticator, if you picture a hemp stalk as 3 to 4 meters tall, with minimal, just a straight stalk.
Yep.
That stalk is made up of 2 key parts. It's the fiber on the outside and the hurd on the inside. And a stalk, about approximately on average 30% fiber by weight, 70% hurd.
Okay.
Now, because this plant is so strong, to separate, you have to add value for the farmers to make money so that they can have more profitable crops, you have to separate the fiber from the core, okay?
Right.
Decorticate.
Yep.
And so that process for 10,000 years was done by rotting the plant.
Oh, okay.
Or by dipping it, as the Chinese do, in huge vats of hot water, swimming pool sized, and then you can separate the fiber from the herd.
Right.
The problem is you then have to dispose of that water,
Yeah.
which is quite polluting in the sense of the lignins that come out of
Yes.
the plant.
Yeah.
Our machine does not need any of that rotting process. That's what Adrian came about to develop. He said, I'm going to develop the world's best machine. So basically, what it now means is that you cut the stalk in the field. So our machine is not a harvester. You harvest the stalk, 3 or 4 meters long, and then you put that stalk through our machine, and you end up with 2 products plus a byproduct, fiber and herd. That's after decortication, and then you'll have some dust depending on how dry the material was. And every part of the plant is valuable and usable.
So what do you use the herd for then?
The herd is used for hempcrete, building magnificent homes. It can be used for the plastics production, because hemp, the herd, is cellulose. And you as a chemist scientist will know that cellulose is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And what are hydrocarbons? Hydrogen, carbon, oxygen. And so cellulose, when you break it down, you've got the same elements as you have with hydrocarbons, and you break it down, and you can then make everything that everything that oil is turned into plastic. Herd can be turned as cellulosic products into equivalent materials. So that's, and thirdly, ethanol. Now, the reason why ethanol is so important to Australia's future is Senator Jim Molan will tell you that our greatest strategic risk is lack of fuel sufficiency and independence in this country. So we've apparently got 14 days of fuel. If the ships stop coming to Australia with fuel, in 2 weeks, we've run out of fuel.
Ouch.
And so the argument is what we need 90 days of fuel in storage for security. Now, in the beauty of hemp is a magnificent crop will grow in 100 days. And we could grow enough hemp in this country, decorticate it, use the fiber for textiles and composite materials, and then make ethanol out of the herd. And ethanol will power anything that petrol will power.
Would you have to modify the cars to
somewhat, yes,
yeah.
But it's a small problem. For example, all dragsters run on ethanol fuel, so it's a slight modification. It's not a big drama, but the point is it's fuel.
Right.
And if you haven't got fuel, then a nation is in big trouble. And I consider that we are in big trouble. So one of our messages is for government to be looking at hemp as a magnificent fuel source. And remember when the American corn farmers started making ethanol from corn? Some 10, 15 years ago, that significantly raised the price of corn and impacted on people's food costs.
Right.
Where if we grow more hemp and make ethanol from it, it won't impact on food costs.
No. Right. So, what's the state of play in the Australian hemp industry, and how are we doing in comparison to other countries?
Well, we have a chicken egg situation. And we have had political interference so that in the hemp industry, to have hemp seed legalized as food for humans, it took 17 years of lobbying, Kylie, and you're involved in the medicinal space, I know, but 17 years of heavy duty lobbying. It was only November 17 that hemp was legalized. Hemp food was legalized. Now, what was that opposition about? The simple fact is that the Queensland police primarily still don't understand the difference between marijuana and industrial hemp. They think anything to do with cannabis is drugs. And so the police would keep pushing back and then get their colleagues in Victoria and New South Wales, where food standards are in Australia and New Zealand for Zants, it said, no, hemp seed is totally safe. 17 years. And people say, why is hemp, if it's so good, has it taken so long? Because of this nonsensical blockage.
Right.
Now, so we're now up to some 4,000 hectares growing around Australia of mainly seed crops, because a seed crop of hemp is different to a fibre crop that I've been talking about.
Okay.
A seed crop is like a bush, 2 meters high.
Yes.
A fibre crop is 3, 4, 5 meters high, sometimes 6 meters high, like amazing volume of material. Same seed planted more closely together means it goes up instead of out.
So is it just the planting, Charles, or are they different cultivars, cultivated varieties?
Well, you need different varieties for different latitudes.
Okay.
So there's both, but the fact is that you can get a seed crop or a fibre crop from the same seed. It's just a question of how closely you plant.
How you plant them, right.
Yes. Because if there's no space to go out, the plant will go
Goes up, of course.
Yeah. It's an incredibly vibrant plant. And what I recommend to a lot of people is that you can grow what's called a dual crop. You grow for seed. And after you take the seed pods off the top, then you have the rest of the stalk to do fibre and herd after you've put it through the decorticator.
Okay, right.
Now, what's happening in the market is this. Farmers aren't growing sufficient hemp because they don't know where they're going to sell it. Whereas if you are in the dairy industry, the wheat industry, the barley industry, you know where you go. There's well-established supply chains.
Sure.
And in the early, hemp is a cottage industry in Australia. We're working to make it a mainstream industry. And the issue is those supply chain problems. So farmers aren't growing it because the markets don't want it, or they don't know what markets do want it. The markets don't want it because no one's growing it in sufficient quantity.
Right.
And because the markets don't want it, farmers aren't growing it. And because the farmers aren't growing it, the markets don't want it. Chicken, egg. What we're doing as an industry body, the peak national body, Australian Industrial Hemp Alliance, is we're driving market demand. We are educating big companies that hemp is your ESG and circular economy solution. And they go, wow, because they've made commitments at public company, big company level. They have made commitments. We're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Their shareholders and global stakeholders are saying, well, have you reduced your emissions? And 3 companies have recently been in trouble. AGL in Australia, Shell in the Netherlands, and Exxon. They have changed board members because they haven't been making progress fast enough in this space. And so our driver is to get big, well cashed up companies excuse me, to want hemp raw materials, and that will give confidence to farmers so that there'll be a fast growth curve. That's our strategic intent.
Fantastic. Charles, I've got a question. In Australia, can you use the flower of the hemp plants to make medicines? Do they do that, or does that require a whole separate sort of set of licenses, I guess?
No, that requires a whole set of separate licenses, and the cost of that extraction process is so great that all that growing seems to be done undercover and under these huge greenhouses, which is very expensive. You could never grow a profitable industrial hemp crop undercover. It couldn't be done. So that if you want, and I think what's going to happen, Kylie, is if in future CBD will become, cannabidiol will become much more, the politicians will be much more relaxed about it. As long as you're not producing THC, I'm very confident that in the short term, not all that long, we're going to have outdoor crops where we take the flowers and the buds before it goes to seed. outside because we're not covered by regulation.
Mm-mm.
Then we use that for medicinal purposes and all the different cannabinoids. And I'm sure in your
Yep.
other episodes, you've been talking about all the different possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And then the remainder stalk is used for go through the decorticator to produce fiber and hurd. And I'm very excited by that because growing the crop just for the flowers and the buds makes those flowers and buds too expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
And at the moment, our decorticator is designed for nice, long, straight bits of stalk. If you grow a bushy crop, then you've got a lot of branching. And the branching means it doesn't go through the decorticator as well. You don't get such a good product. So that's the issue. I'm talking to a number of growers in America who can see this opportunity. Hey, we want to do medicinal plus industrial, and that's the distinction in the terms.
So what I'm trying to understand in Australia, Charles, is with the hemp plants that are grown for the industrial use now, what do they do with the flowers?
There are two things that you do. You either harvest before it gets to flowers, or you let it go to seed.
Right.
And you would harvest early because you want the finest fiber, less than 20 microns.
Okay.
But if you want more hurd and thicker fibers, then you'd let it go to seed. Then you go through with a harvester to take the seed off the top, so no flowers and buds.
Yep.
And then the remainder stalk is then harvested for the fiber and the hurd.
Okay, that's interesting. So I didn't realise that you will time the when you harvest it in order to get a slightly different, I guess, product.
Yes, and the finest fibers under 20 microns are the highest value. So if you look at in the Weekly Times, anybody listening to this, if you look at the price of 17 micron wool versus 30 micron wool, it's a significant premium for the finer wool.
So Charles, tell me what's next for the Australian hemp industry? What does it need to do to move forward?
The first thing for this industry to grow, it's now ready for significant capital investment. So that the people who have been driving this industry, including TCI, that I'm now the CEO for 27 years, everyone's been doing it on the smell of an oily rag.
Right.
The industry has been proven, the products have been proven. Yes. What it now needs is significant investors, significant large farmers to put their resources into hemp rather than keeping it at a cottage level. And I urge everybody, if they want to make excellent money in farming, and I'll give you the number, if you grow a fiber crop, you can make anywhere from $3,000 to $7,000 profit per hectare. And that is a very attractive profit. And so many of the big players in farming have resisted going to hemp because they wanted all the supply chain issues resolved. This industry is now ready for significant equity, financial investment.
Charles, if people in particular, those outside of Australia, are interested in learning more about this, how would they best get in contact with you? Is the Australian Industrial Hemp Alliance website a good place for information and they can contact you through that? Correct,
or textilecomposites.com.au. So textile composites, in fact, that's a good, so textile and composite industries, or if you search Decorticator, I'm findable, or if you search Kovess on the internet, I show up some 3,000 or 4,000 times. So as you said, I have my own Charles Kovess show, the weekly show.
That's right.
So I'm the easiest bloke in the world to find.
That's great. You know, and I highly recommend that Charles Kovess show. I listen to it every week myself. Thank you. Look, Charles, thanks so very much for being part of Considering Cannabis, the ICCM podcast. I've certainly learned a massive amount about hemp today just talking to you. So thanks so much for being part of this.
Thank you for the invitation. Wonderful to be with you, and may all of you consider cannabis more deeply.
Thanks, Charles. So just to finish off, for those who don't know about the ICCM, the International College of Cannabinoid Medicine, you can go to iccm.co. and you can learn about what we're doing there. It's an online platform for healthcare practitioners to learn all about the evidence base of medicinal cannabis. So we've got over 20 of the world's experts giving 30-minute talks, and they are accessible in our video library. We also have regular webinars on the medicinal use of cannabis as well. So lots of information for healthcare practitioners and others there. So we'll sign off and we'll see you at our next Considering Cannabis podcast.